Aesop's Fables. The Wolf and the Kid. There was once a little kid whose growing horns made him think he was a grown-up billy goat and able to take care of himself. So one evening when the fox started home from the pasture and his mother called, the kid paid no heed and kept right on nibbling the tender grass. A little later, when he lifted his head, the fox was gone. He was all alone. The sun was sinking. Long shadows came creeping over the ground. A chilly little wind came creeping with them, making scary noises in the grass. The kid shivered as he thought of the terrible wolf. Then he started wildly over the feld, bleating for his mother. But not halfway, near a clump of trees, there was the wolf. The kid knew there was little hope for him. "Please, Mr. Wolf," he said, trembling, "I know you're going to eat me. But first please pipe me a tune, for I want to dance and be merry as long as I can." The wolf liked the idea of a little music before eating, so he struck up a merry tune, and the kid leaped and frisked gaily. Meanwhile, the fox was moving slowly homeward. In the still evening air the wolf's piping carried far. The shepherd dogs pricked up their ears. They recognized the song the wolf sings before a feast, and in a moment they were racing back to the pasture. The wolf's song ended suddenly, and as he ran, with the dogs at his heels, he called himself a fool for turning piper to please a kid, when he should have stuck to his butcher's trade. Moral: do not let anything turn you from your purpose. The Tortoise and the Ducks. The tortoise, you know, carries his house on his back. No matter how hard he tries, he cannot leave home. They say that Jupiter punished him so, because he was such a lazy stay-at-home that he would not go to Jupiter's wedding, even when especially invited. After many years, Tortoise began to wish he had gone to that wedding. When he saw how gaily the birds flew about, and how the hare and the chipmunk and all the other animals ran nimbly by, always eager to see everything there was to be seen, the tortoise felt very sad and discontented. He wanted to see the world too, and there he was with a house on his back and little short legs that could hardly drag him along. One day he met a pair of ducks and told them all his trouble. "We can help you to see the world," said the ducks. "Take hold of this stick with your teeth, and we will carry you far up in the air where you can see the whole countryside. But keep quiet, or you will be sorry." The tortoise was very glad indeed. He seized the stick firmly with his teeth. The two ducks took hold of it, one at each end, and away they sailed up toward the clouds. Just then, a crow flew by. He was very much astonished at the strange sight and cried, "This must surely be the king of tortoises." "Why, certainly," began the tortoise. But as he opened his mouth to say these foolish words, he lost his hold on the stick, and down he fell to the ground, where he was dashed to pieces on a rock. Moral: foolish curiosity and vanity often lead to misfortune. The young crab and his mother. "Why in the world do you walk sideways like that?" said a mother crab to her son. "You should always walk straight forward with your toes turned out." "Show me how to walk, mother dear," answered the little crab obediently. "I want to learn." So the old crab tried and tried to walk straight forward, but she could walk sideways only, like her son. And when she wanted to turn her toes out, she tripped and fell on her nose. Moral: do not tell others how to act unless you can set a good example. The Frogs and the Ox. An ox came down to a reedy pool to drink. As he splashed heavily into the water, he crushed a young frog into the mud. The old frog soon missed the little. one and asked his brothers and sisters what had become of him. "A great big monster," said one of them, "stepped on little brother with one of his huge feet." "Big was he," said the old frog, puffing herself up. "Was he as big as this?" "Oh, much bigger," they cried. The frog puffed up still more. "He could not have been bigger than this," she said. But the little frogs all declared that the monster was much, much bigger, and the old frog kept puffing herself out more and more until, all at once, she burst. Moral: do not attempt the impossible. The dog, the cock, and the fox. A dog and a cock, who were the best of friends, wished very much to see something of the world. So they decided to leave the farmyard and to set out into the world along the road that led to the woods. The two comrades traveled along in the very best of spirits and without meeting any adventure to speak of. At nightfall the cock, looking for a place to roost, as was his custom, spied nearby a hollow tree that he thought would do very nicely for a night's lodging. The dog could creep inside and the cock would fly up on one of the branches. So said, so done, and both slept very comfortably. With the first glimmer of dawn the cock awoke. For the moment he forgot just where he was. He thought he was still in the farmyard, where it had been his duty to arouse the household at daybreak. So standing on tiptoes he flapped his wings and crowed lustily. But instead of awakening the farmer, he awakened a fox not far off in the wood. The fox immediately had rosy visions of a very delicious breakfast. Hurrying to the tree where the cock was roosting, he said very politely, "A hearty welcome to our woods, honored sir. I cannot tell you how glad I am to see you here. I am quite sure we shall become the closest of friends." "I feel highly flattered, kind sir," replied the cock slyly. "If you will please go around to the door of my house at the foot of the tree, my porter will let you in." The hungry but unsuspecting fox went around the tree as he was told, and in a twinkling the dog had seized him. Moral: those who try to deceive may expect to be paid in their own coin. Belling the cat. The mice once called a meeting to decide on a plan to free themselves of their enemy, the cat. At least they wished to find some way of knowing when she was coming, so they might have time to run away. Indeed, something had to be done, but they lived in such constant fear of her claws that they hardly dared stir from their dens by night or day. Many plans were discussed, but none of them was thought good enough. At last a very young mouse got up and said, "I have a plan that seems very simple, but I know it will be successful. All we have to do is to hang a bell about the cat's neck. When we hear the bell ringing, we will know immediately that our enemy is coming." All the mice were much surprised that they had not thought of such a plan before. But in the midst of the rejoicing over their good fortune, an old mouse arose and said, "I will say that the plan of the young mouse is very good. But let me ask one question. Who will bell the cat?" Moral: it is one thing to say that something should be done, but quite a different matter to do it. The eagle and the jackdaw. An eagle, swooping down on powerful wings, seized a lamb in her talons and made off with it to her nest. A jackdaw saw the deed, and his silly head was filled with the idea that he was big and strong enough to do as the eagle had done. So with much rustling of feathers and a fierce air, he came down swiftly on the back of a large ram. But when he tried to rise again, he found that he could not get away, for his claws were tangled in the wool. And so far was he from carrying away the ram, that the ram hardly noticed he was there. The shepherd saw the futtering jackdaw and at once guessed what had happened. Running up, he caught the bird and clipped its wings. That evening he gave the jackdaw to his children. "What a funny bird this is," they said, laughing. "What do you call it, father?" "That is a jackdaw, my children. But if you should ask him, he would say he is an eagle." Moral: do not let your vanity make you overestimate your powers. The Boy and the Filberts. A boy was given permission to put his hand into a pitcher to get some filberts, but he took such a great fistful that he could not draw his hand out again. There he stood, unwilling to give up a single filbert, and yet unable to get them all out at once. Vexed and disappointed, he began to cry. "My boy," said his mother, "be satisfied with half the nuts you have taken, and you will easily get your hand out. Then perhaps you may have some more filberts some other time." Moral: do not attempt too much at once. Hercules and the Wagoner. A farmer was driving his wagon along a miry country road after a heavy rain. The horses could hardly drag the load through the deep mud, and at last came to a standstill when one of the wheels sank to the hub in a rut. The farmer climbed down from his seat and stood beside the wagon looking at it, but without making the least effort to get it out of the rut. All he did was to curse his bad luck and call loudly on Hercules to come to his aid. Then, it is said, Hercules really did appear, saying, "Put your shoulder to the wheel, man, and urge on your horses. Do you think you can move the wagon by simply looking at it and whining about it? Hercules will not help unless you make some effort to help yourself." And when the farmer put his shoulder to the wheel and urged on the horses, the wagon moved very readily. And soon the farmer was riding along in great content and with a good lesson learned. Moral: self-help is the best help. Heaven God helps those who help themselves. The Kid and the Wolf. A frisky young kid had been left by the herdsman on the thatched roof of a sheep shelter to keep him out of harm's way. The kid was browsing near the edge of the roof when he spied a wolf and began to jeer at him, making faces and abusing him to his heart's content. "I hear you," said the wolf, "and I haven't the least grudge against you for what you say or do. When you are up there, it is the roof that's talking, not you." Moral: do not say anything at any time that you would not say at all times. The Town Mouse and the Country Mouse. Once upon a time, a town mouse went off to the country to visit one of her relatives. The country mouse was really thrilled to see her, and at lunchtime she served up what she usually had, which was wheat stalks, grass seeds, roots and acorns, with a little drop of cold water to wash it all down. The town mouse didn't eat very much, and just nibbled a little bit of her food. She pulled a face as she didn't like the food at all, but tried her best to be polite. After the meal, the two mice had a good old chat. Well, actually, the town mouse talked about what a wonderful life she had in the town while the country mouse just listened. That night they went off to bed in a cozy nest in the hedge, and had a peaceful and snug sleep until early the next morning. The country mouse had dreamt all about the lovely life that her relative had told her about. When the town mouse asked the country mouse if she'd like to come back to the town with her, her little eyes sparkled and she said, "Oh, yes please." After a long journey on their little mousy legs, they finally arrived at the big house where the town mouse lived. They were both very hungry, so when they went into the grand dining room, they were delighted to find the leftovers of a feast on the table. There were jellies, cakes, and delicious-looking cheeses, the sorts of foods that a country mouse can only dream about. The country mouse picked up a lovely little bit of pastry in her paw and was about to take a bite when suddenly she heard a cat mewing and scratching at the door. The two little mice were very frightened and scampered off to a little hiding place, where they waited for a long time, hardly daring to breathe. The town mouse peeped out and the cat had gone. But just as they were about to get back to the lovely food, the cook came bursting in to clear the table. And right behind the cook was the house dog.
Grrr.
The country mouse went straight to the town mouse's little den and quickly packed her little bag. "Sorry, but I've got to go. I haven't got a big house to live in, or all the delicious food you've got, but I much prefer my simple, safe and peaceful country life." And with that, she scampered off. And the moral of the story is that it is sometimes better to live a safe and peaceful life than a life of luxury that might end in disaster. The Fox and the Grapes. A fox one day spied a beautiful bunch of ripe grapes hanging from a vine trained along the branches of a tree. The grapes seemed ready to burst with juice, and the fox's mouth watered as he gazed longingly at them. The bunch hung from a high branch, and the fox had to jump for it. The first time he jumped, he missed it by a long way. So he walked off a short distance and took a running leap at it, only to fall short once more. Again and again he tried, but in vain. Now he sat down and looked at the grapes in disgust. "What a fool I am," he said. "Here I am wearing myself out to get a bunch of sour grapes that are not worth gaping for." And off he walked very, very scornfully. Moral: there are many who pretend to despise and belittle that which is beyond their reach. The bundle of sticks. A certain father had a family of sons who were forever quarreling among themselves. No words he could say did the least good. So he cast about in his mind for some very striking example that should make them see that discord would lead them to misfortune. One day, when the quarreling had been much more violent than usual, and each of the sons was moping in a surly manner, he asked one of them to bring him a bundle of sticks. Then, handing the bundle to each of his sons in turn, he told them to try to break it. But although each one tried his best, none was able to do so. The father then untied the bundle and gave the sticks to his sons to break one by one. This they did very easily. "My sons," said the father, "do you not see how certain it is that if you agree with each other and help each other, it will be impossible for your enemies to injure you? But if you are divided among yourselves, you will be no stronger than a single stick in that bundle." Moral: in unity is strength. The Wolf and the Crane. A wolf had been feasting too greedily, and a bone had stuck crosswise in his throat. He could get it neither up nor down, and of course he could not eat a thing. Naturally, that was an awful state of affairs for a greedy wolf. So away he hurried to the crane. He was sure that she, with her long neck and bill, would easily be able to reach the bone and pull it out. "I will reward you very handsomely," said the wolf, "if you pull that bone out for me." The crane, as you can imagine, was very uneasy about putting her head in a wolf's throat, but she was grasping in nature, so she did what the wolf asked her to do. When the wolf felt that the bone was gone, he started to walk away. "But what about my reward?" called the crane anxiously. "What?" snarled the wolf, whirling around. "Haven't you got it? Isn't it enough that I let you take your head out of my mouth without snapping it off?" Moral: expect no reward for serving the wicked. The Ass and his Driver. An ass was being driven along a road leading down the mountainside, when he suddenly took it into his silly head to choose his own path. He could see his stall at the foot of the mountain, and to him the quickest way down seemed to be over the edge of the nearest cliff. Just as he was about to leap over, his master caught him by the tail and tried to pull him back, but the stubborn ass would not yield and pulled with all his might. "Very well," said his master, "go your way, you willful beast, and see where it leads you." With that he let go, and the foolish ass tumbled head over heels down the mountainside. Moral: they who will not listen to reason but stubbornly go their own way against the friendly advice of those who are wiser than they, are on the road to misfortune. The Oxen and the Wheels. A pair of oxen were drawing a heavily loaded wagon along a miry country road. They had to use all their strength to pull the wagon, but they did not complain. The wheels of the wagon were of a different sort. Though the task they had to do was very light compared with that of the oxen, they creaked and groaned at every turn. The poor oxen, pulling with all their might to draw the wagon through the deep mud, had their ears filled with the loud complaining of the wheels. And this, you may well know, made their work so much the harder to endure. "Silence!" the oxen cried at last, out of patience. "What have you wheels to complain about so loudly? We are drawing all the weight, not you, and we are keeping still about it besides." Moral: they complain most who suffer least. The Lion and the Mouse. A lion lay asleep in the forest, his great head resting on his paws. A timid little mouse came upon him unexpectedly, and in her fright and haste to get away, ran across the lion's nose. Roused from his nap, the lion laid his huge paw angrily on the tiny creature to kill her. "Spare me," begged the poor mouse. "Please let me go, and some day I will surely repay you." The lion was much amused to think that a mouse could ever help him. But he was generous, and finally let the mouse go. Some days later, while stalking his prey in the forest, the lion was caught in the toils of a hunter's net. Unable to free himself, he filled the forest with his angry roaring. The mouse knew the voice and quickly found the lion struggling in the net. Running to one of the great ropes that bound him, she gnawed it until it parted, and soon the lion was free. "You laughed when I said I would repay you," said the mouse. "Now you see that even a mouse can help a lion." Moral: a kindness is never wasted. The Shepherd Boy and the Wolf. The boy that cried wolf. A shepherd boy tended his master's sheep near a dark forest not far from the village. Soon he found life in the pasture very dull. All he could do to amuse himself was to talk to his dog or play on his shepherd's pipe. One day, as he sat watching the sheep in the quiet forest, and thinking what he would do should he see a wolf, he thought of a plan to amuse himself. His master had told him to call for help should a wolf attack the flock, and the villagers would drive it away. So now, though he had not seen anything that even looked like a wolf, he ran toward the village shouting at the top of his voice, "Wolf! Wolf!" As he expected, the villagers who heard the cry dropped their work and ran in great excitement to the pasture. But when they got there, they found the boy doubled up with laughter at the trick he had played on them. A few days later, the shepherd boy again shouted, "Wolf! Wolf!" Again the villagers ran to help him, only to be laughed at again. Then one evening, as the sun was setting behind the forest, and the shadows were creeping out over the pasture, a wolf really did spring from the underbrush and fall upon the sheep. In terror, the boy ran toward the village shouting, "Wolf! Wolf!" But though the villagers heard the cry, they did not run to help him as they had before. "He cannot fool us again," they said. The wolf killed a great many of the boy's sheep, and then slipped away into the forest. Moral: liars are not believed even when they speak the truth. The Gnat and the Bull. A gnat flew over the meadow with much buzzing for so small a creature, and settled on the tip of one of the horns of a bull. After he had rested a short time, he made ready to fly away. But before he left, he begged the bull's pardon for having used his horn for a resting place. "You must be very glad to have me go now," he said. "It's all the same to me," replied the bull. "I did not even know you were there." Moral: we are often of greater importance in our own eyes than in the eyes of our neighbor. The smaller the mind, the greater the conceit. The plane tree. Two travelers, walking in the noonday sun, sought the shade of a wide-spreading tree to rest. As they lay looking up among the pleasant leaves, they saw that it was a plane tree. "How useless is the plane," said one of them. "It bears no fruit whatever, and only serves to litter the ground with leaves." "Ungrateful creatures," said a voice from the plane tree. "You lie here in my cooling shade, and yet you say I am useless. Thus ungratefully, O Jupiter, do men receive their blessings?" Moral: our best blessings are often the least appreciated. The farmer and the stork. A stork of a very simple and trusting nature had been asked by a gay party of cranes to visit a feld that had been newly planted. But the party ended dismally with all the birds entangled in the meshes of the farmer's net. The stork begged the farmer to spare him. "Please let me go," he pleaded. "I belong to the stork family, who you know are honest and birds of good character. Besides, I did not know the cranes were going to steal." "You may be a very good bird," answered the farmer, "but I caught you with the thieving cranes, and you will have to share the same punishment with them." Moral: you are judged by the company you keep. The sheep and the pig. One day a shepherd discovered a fat pig in the meadow where his sheep were pastured. He very quickly captured the porker, which squealed at the top of its voice the moment the shepherd laid his hands on it. You would have thought, to hear the loud squealing, that the pig was being cruelly hurt, but in spite of its squeals and struggles to escape, the shepherd tucked his prize under his arm and started off to the butcher's in the marketplace. The sheep in the pasture were much astonished and amused at the pig's behavior, and followed the shepherd and his charge to the pasture gate. "What makes you squeal like that?" asked one of the sheep. "The shepherd often catches and carries off one of us, but we should feel very much ashamed to make such a terrible fuss about it like you do." "That is all very well," replied the pig, with a squeal and a frantic kick. "When he catches you, he is only after your wool, but he wants my bacon. Gree!" Moral: it is easy to be brave when there is no danger. The travelers and the purse. Two men were traveling in company along the road when one of them picked up a well-filled purse. "How lucky I am," he said. "I have found a purse. Judging by its weight, it must be full of gold." "Do not say, 'I have found a purse,'" said his companion. "Say rather, 'We have found a purse, and how lucky we are.' Travelers ought to share alike the fortunes or misfortunes of the road." "No, no," replied the other angrily. "I found it and I am going to keep it." Just then they heard a shout of "Stop, thief!" and looking around saw a mob of people armed with clubs coming down the road. The man who had found the purse fell into a panic. "We are lost if they fended the purse on us," he cried. "No, no," replied the other. "You would not say we before, so now stick to your I. Say I am lost." Moral: we cannot expect anyone to share our misfortunes unless we are willing to share our good fortune also. The lion and the ass. One day, as the lion walked proudly down a forest aisle, and the animals respectfully made way for him, an ass brayed a scornful remark as he passed. The lion felt a flash of anger. But when he turned his head and saw who had spoken, he walked quietly on. He would not honor the fool with even so much as a stroke of his claws. Moral: do not resent the remarks of a fool. Ignore them. The frogs who wished for a king. The frogs were tired of governing themselves. They had so much freedom that it had spoiled them, and they did nothing but sit around croaking in a bored manner and wishing for a government that could entertain them with the pomp and display of royalty, and rule them in a way to make them know they were being ruled. No milk and water government for them, they declared. So they sent a petition to Jupiter, asking for a king. Jupiter saw what simple and foolish creatures they were, but to keep them quiet, and make them think they had a king, he threw down a huge log, which fell into the water with a great splash. The frogs hid themselves among the reeds and grasses, thinking the new king to be some fearful giant. But they soon discovered how tame and peaceable King Log was. In a short time the younger frogs were using him for a diving platform, while the older frogs made him a meeting place, where they complained loudly to Jupiter about the government. To teach the frogs a lesson, the ruler of the gods now sent a crane to be king of Frogland. The crane proved to be a very different sort of king from old King Log. He gobbled up the poor frogs right and left, and they soon saw what fools they had been. In mournful croaks they begged Jupiter to take away the cruel tyrant before they should all be destroyed. "How now?" cried Jupiter. "Are you not yet content? You have what you asked for, and so you have only yourselves to blame for your misfortunes." Moral: be sure you can better your condition before you seek to change. The Owl and the Grasshopper. The owl always takes her sleep during the day. Then after sundown, when the rosy light fades from the sky and the shadows rise slowly through the wood, out she comes ruffing and blinking from the old hollow tree. Now her weird hoo-hoo-hoo-oo-oo echoes through the quiet wood, and she begins her hunt for the bugs and beetles, frogs and mice she likes so well to eat. Now there was a certain old owl who had become very cross and hard to please as she grew older, especially if anything disturbed her daily slumbers. One warm summer afternoon, as she dozed away in her den in the old oak tree, a grasshopper nearby began a joyous but very raspy song. Out popped the old owl's head from the opening in the tree that served her both for door and for window. "Get away from here, sir," she said to the grasshopper. "Have you no manners? You should at least respect my age and leave me to sleep in quiet." But the grasshopper answered saucily that he had as much right to his place in the sun as the owl had to her place in the old oak. Then he struck up a louder and still more rasping tune. The wise old owl knew quite well that it would do no good to argue with the grasshopper, nor with anybody else for that matter. Besides, her eyes were not sharp enough by day to permit her to punish the grasshopper as he deserved. So she laid aside all hard words and spoke very kindly to him. "Well, sir," she said, "if I must stay awake, I am going to settle right down to enjoy your singing. Now that I think of it, I have a wonderful wine here, sent me from Olympus, of which I am told Apollo drinks before he sings to the high gods. Please come up and taste this delicious drink with me. I know it will make you sing like Apollo himself." The foolish grasshopper was taken in by the owl's flattering words. Up he jumped to the owl's den, but as soon as he was near enough so the old owl could see him clearly, she pounced upon him and ate him up. Moral: flattery is not a proof of true admiration. Do not let flattery throw you off your guard against an enemy. The Wolf and His Shadow. A wolf left his lair one evening in fine spirits and an excellent appetite. As he ran, the setting sun cast his shadow far out on the ground, and it looked as if the wolf were 100 times bigger than he really was. "Why," exclaimed the wolf proudly, "see how big I am. Fancy me running away from a puny lion. I'll show him who is FTB king, he or I." Just then an immense shadow blotted him out entirely, and the next instant a lion struck him down with a single blow. Moral: do not let your fancy make you forget realities. The Oak and the Reeds. A giant oak stood near a brook in which grew some slender reeds. When the wind blew, the great oak stood proudly upright with its 100 arms uplifted to the sky. But the reeds bowed low in the wind and sang a sad and mournful song. "You have reason to complain," said the oak. "The slightest breeze that roughs the surface of the water makes you bow your heads, while I, the mighty oak, stand upright and firm before the howling tempest." "Do not worry about us," replied the reeds. "The winds do not harm us. We bow before them, and so we do not break. You, in all your pride and strength, have so far resisted their blows, but the end is coming." As the reeds spoke, a great hurricane rushed out of the north. The oak stood proudly and fought against the storm, while the yielding reeds bowed low. The wind redoubled in fury, and all at once the great tree fell, torn up by the roots, and lay among the pitying reeds. Moral: better to yield when it is folly to resist, than to resist stubbornly and be destroyed. The Rat and the Elephant. A rat was traveling along the king's highway. He was a very proud rat, considering his small size and the bad reputation all rats have. As Mr. Rat walked along, he kept mostly to the ditch. He noticed a great commotion up the road, and soon a grand procession came in view. It was the king and his retinue. The king rode on a huge elephant adorned with the most gorgeous trappings. With the king in his luxurious howdah were the royal dog and cat. A great crowd of people followed the procession. They were so taken up with admiration of the elephant that the rat was not noticed. His pride was hurt. "What fools!" he cried. "Look at me, and you will soon forget that clumsy elephant. Is it his great size that makes your eyes pop out? Or is it his wrinkled hide? Why, I have eyes and ears and as many legs as he. I am of just as much importance, and—" But just then the royal cat spied him, and the next instant the rat knew he was not quite so important as an elephant. Moral: a resemblance to the great in some things does not make us great. The Boys and the Frogs. Some boys were playing one day at the edge of a pond in which lived a family of frogs. The boys amused themselves by throwing stones into the pond so as to make them skip on top of the water. The stones were flying thick and fast, and the boys were enjoying themselves very much, but the poor frogs in the pond were trembling with fear. At last one of the frogs, the oldest and bravest, put his head out of the water and said, "Oh, please, dear children, stop your cruel play. Though it may be fun for you, it means death to us." Moral: always stop to think whether your fun may not be the cause of another's unhappiness. The Crow and the Pitcher. In a spell of dry weather, when the birds could find very little to drink, a thirsty crow found a pitcher with a little water in it. But the pitcher was high and had a narrow neck, and no matter how he tried, the crow could not reach the water. The poor thing felt as if he must die of thirst. Then an idea came to him. Picking up some small pebbles, he dropped them into the pitcher one by one. With each pebble, the water rose a little higher, until at last it was near enough so he could drink. Moral: in a pinch a good use of our wits may help us out. The Ants and the Grasshopper. One bright day in late autumn, a family of ants were bustling about in the warm sunshine, drying out the grain they had stored up during the summer, when a starving grasshopper, his fiddle under his arm, came up and humbly begged for a bite to eat. "What?" cried the ants in surprise. "Haven't you stored anything away for the winter? What in the world were you doing all last summer?" "I didn't have time to store up any food," whined the grasshopper. "I was so busy making music that before I knew it the summer was gone." The ants shrugged their shoulders in disgust. "Making music, were you?" they cried. "Very well, now dance." And they turned their backs on the grasshopper and went on with their work. Moral: there's a time for work and a time for play. The ass carrying the image. A sacred image was being carried to the temple. It was mounted on an ass adorned with garlands and gorgeous trappings, and a grand procession of priests and pages followed it through the streets. As the ass walked along, the people bowed their heads reverently or fell on their knees, and the ass thought the honor was being paid to himself. With his head full of this foolish idea, he became so puffed up with pride and vanity that he halted and started to bray loudly. But in the midst of his song, his driver guessed what the ass had got into his head, and began to beat him unmercifully with a stick. "Go along with you, you stupid ass," he cried. "The honor is not meant for you but for the image you are carrying." Moral: do not try to take the credit to yourself that is due to others. A raven and a swan. A raven, which you know is black as coal, was envious of the swan, because her feathers were as white as the purest snow. The foolish bird got the idea that if he lived like the swan, swimming and diving all day long and eating the weeds and plants that grow in the water, his feathers would turn white like the swan's. So he left his home in the woods and fells and flew down to live on the lakes and in the marshes. But though he washed and washed all day long, almost drowning himself at it, his feathers remained as black as ever, and as the water weeds he ate did not agree with him, he got thinner and thinner, and at last he died. Moral: a change of habits will not alter nature. The two goats. Two goats, frisking gaily on the rocky steeps of a mountain valley, chanced to meet, one on each side of a deep chasm, through which poured a mighty mountain torrent. The trunk of a fallen tree formed the only means of crossing the chasm, and on this not even two squirrels could have passed each other in safety. The narrow path would have made the bravest tremble. Not so our goats. Their pride would not permit either to stand aside for the other. One set her foot on the log. The other did likewise. In the middle they met horn to horn. Neither would give way, and so they both fell, to be swept away by the roaring torrent below. Moral: it is better to yield than to come to misfortune through stubbornness. The ass and the load of salt. A merchant, driving his ass homeward from the seashore with a heavy load of salt, came to a river crossed by a shallow ford. They had crossed this river many times before without accident, but this time the ass slipped and fell when halfway over. And when the merchant at last got him to his feet, much of the salt had melted away. Delighted to find how much lighter his burden had become, the ass finished the journey very gaily. Next day the merchant went for another load of salt. On the way home the ass, remembering what had happened at the ford, purposely let himself fall into the water, and again got rid of most of his burden. The angry merchant immediately turned about and drove the ass back to the seashore, where he loaded him with 2 great baskets of sponges. At the ford the ass again tumbled over, but when he had scrambled to his feet, it was a very disconsolate ass that dragged himself homeward under a load 10 times heavier than before. Moral: the same measures will not suit all circumstances. Please like and subscribe for more bedtime tales.